In this video, we'll talk about the types of white blood cells and their basic function. So white blood cells are known as leukocytes, and they all function in the immune system in different ways. So we'll take a look at the different types of leukocytes and how they function in the immune system. The white blood cell count is much, much lower than the red blood cell count. With red blood cells, we were looking at like 5 million cells per cubic millimeter. With white blood cells, you could be looking at 5,000 cells per cubic millimeter. And so the leukocyte count is much different. It's approximately 5 to 10,000 cells per cubic millimeter. White blood cells make up under 1% of the blood volume. So when there is a high or low white blood count, that is an indicator of, something going on in the body. High white blood cell count is called leukocytosis, and leukocytosis is when the count is over 11,000. It could indicate infection, right? Because white blood cells are proliferating. Leukopenia is what we would call a low white count, below 5,000 cells, and that could be secondary to a treatment like chemotherapy that's, reducing the white blood cell population. So all white blood cells fall into one of two categories, and it's based on the visual appearance of these like sandy kind of granules in the cytoplasm, whether they're there or not. And so luckily for us, we don't have to decide whether, the cytoplasm looks grainy or not. This has been done for us. And so there are two categories. The granulocytes are the leukocytes that have, the grainy cytoplasm, compared to the agranulocytes are the leukocytes that have the clear cytoplasm. So what I did in the notes is I listed the 5 different types of leukocytes. Okay, I have them categorized up here. But what I'm going to do is jump over to a picture so we can take a look at these as we talk about them. So let's talk about this one first. I don't know if you recognize this one yet, but this is the most common leukocyte. It's called a neutrophil, and the neutrophil makes up like 55 to 62% of the white blood cell population. Let's jump to a picture where we can see the neutrophil a little bit closer. Okay, so in this picture, you can see that the neutrophil has the grainy cytoplasm. You can also see that the nucleus looks really different from what we're used to. It looks kind of like segmented and maybe even like a little linear. And the thing with the neutrophil nucleus is it's polymorphic. It looks different in each of the cells. But I would say, like, if you're looking at this in lab, one, you're definitely going to see neutrophils because it's the most common type of cell. And look for, a nucleus that has, 2 to 3 segments, and it doesn't look the same in all of the cells, and you should be able to find it. So the neutrophil is a general phagocyte, meaning that it doesn't care, what it is. If it's foreign, it's going to engulf it. So it's going to engulf, cellular debris or bacteria, whatever's there that shouldn't be there. The neutrophil's not picky. Okay, it's just going to engulf the cell. So it's a general phagocyte. It doesn't really circulate around and around the circulation. What it can do is it can squeeze out of a blood vessel and go to the area where it's needed. So to go back to our big picture here, let's just go right down the line. So this top row, these are the granulocytes. So again, the grainy cytoplasm compared to the agranulocytes in the second row. So this one is an eosinophil, and the eosinophil usually has a bilobed nucleus. You can see that in this picture, those two kind of blobs, and the granules stain red, which is a great, characteristic to identify an eosinophil on the lab practical. So taking a closer look at that, here's the picture from our book. Okay, so this is a nice picture. We can see the bilobed nucleus. You can see the red granules. Eosinophils are also phagocytic cells, but what they can do is they can actually secrete, like, let's say like an acid bath onto a foreign invader. So eosinophils are very good cells for attacking pathogens that are larger, microbes that are larger. So say like if we had a parasitic worm, there's no one cell of ours that's going to engulf a multicellular organism like a worm, but the eosinophil will secrete let's say like an acid bath, so to speak, onto the parasitic worm, kill it, and then the neutrophils could come in and phagocytize all the debris. Eosinophils are very effective in allergy too, because if you have a pathogen, say like, it's not really attacking us, but like, pollen or dander, and we produce antibodies against it, which is the allergy. So if we produce antibodies against that pathogen, so these Y-shaped things, these are antibodies, it turns into this gigantic complex. And so, again, eosinophils would be effective in, showering this with their acid bath, breaking it down, and then a general phagocyte like the neutrophil could come in and engulf the debris. So there's one more type of granulocyte. It's called basophil. This is the basophil. In this cell, you really can't even see where the nucleus is, and that's because the granules in the cytoplasm stain blue. So let's take a look at basophil from our book. So this is a little bit better. So it's still hard to make out the nucleus, but it usually has that bilobed nucleus, just like the eosinophil. The basophil is the least common of the white blood cells. Basophil making up under 1% of the white blood cell population. And remember, the white blood cell population is already under 1% of the blood cell population. So this one's tough to find. The basophil secretes heparin and histamine. Heparin is a substance that prevents clotting within an unbroken vessel, so it keeps our blood fluid. And histamine, you've probably heard of antihistamines. A histamine would be a chemical messenger that's calling more white blood cells into an area. So again, if you had that pollen that is attacking, what the basophil could do is it could secrete histamine into the area, and what histamine would do is it would attract more white blood cells into this area. In other words, it's going to increase inflammation, and those cells are going to attack that pollen. And what an antihistamine would do is block that action. So we don't want more cells coming into this area, because this isn't really even going to attack us. It's not hurting us. So we're just sensitive to it. In other words, we make antibodies against it. So the basophil is the least common, and I'm going to jump back to the eosinophil. This one makes up about 1 to 3% of the white blood cell population. So that's also, not that numerous. So taking a look at our agranulocytes, I'm going to talk about this one next. This is a monocyte. A monocyte is the largest of the white blood cells, and so you might be able to tell that from this picture. It also has usually like a kidney-shaped nucleus, which I know we have to use some imagination on this one for the kidney shape. But let's take a look at another picture from the book. So there we go. So we can see this is a big white blood cell, has that kidney-shaped nucleus. Monocytes make up about 3 to 9% of the white blood cell population. And what monocytes do are similar to neutrophils in that they're phagocytic cells, but the monocyte differs in that the monocyte will go into the circulation, stay there only for about a day, enter into one of our organs, enter into a tissue, and live out the rest of its life in that tissue. So there are organs that have large populations of monocytes that, live there. And one example, which I talked about in the last video, but I never mentioned this, is the Kupffer cell. So the Kupffer cell is a type of cell that is the liver cell that engulfs dead red blood cells. Well, technically, those Kupffer cells come from monocytes. So monocytes move into the peripheral tissue, and at that point they're known as a macrophage. So you might have heard of macrophages, and a macrophage we don't have on our list, and that's what a monocyte is. It's known as a macrophage once it moves into tissue and lives out the rest of its days there. So the lungs are another area that have a big population of macrophages called dust cells that engulf debris and other things that we breathe in. Kidneys have a big population of macrophages. And then I saved the lymphocyte, another agranulocyte, for last, because the lymphocyte is so much different from all of the other white blood cells because it provides specific immunity. And so this one, you can carve out, this is a whole world of the immune system that's different from the others. There are many different types of lymphocytes. Lymphocytes make up about 25 to 33% of the white blood cell population. Here's the picture in our book. You can usually see that like halo of cytoplasm around, a pretty like round nucleus. They're easy to find. And as I mentioned, there are many different types of lymphocytes. And I'm going to jump back over to the notes because I mentioned this in the notes. So this is the only type of white blood cell that provides specific immunity. In other words, it recognizes what it's attacking, or it learns to recognize what it's attacking. And so two main types of lymphocytes, like I said, this is an entire world of information, are B cells. B cells are the cells that ultimately produce antibodies. And so in order to have antibody production, you have to have recognition of the antigen. And that's something that the B cell, along with, a whole like interplay of interactions with lymphocytes, learn and produce antibodies. And then T cells are incredibly smart cells. They provide cellular immunity, which means that they can attack virus-infected body cells. So the way that virus works is that it comes into the body. Let's say here's a regular body cell, and let's say that the virus comes in. And so the virus actually goes into our body cell. It's not floating around too much. So it takes up a home in one of our cells. It hijacks our organelles, and it starts producing its own protein, and it starts replicating itself. So the virus starts to replicate within the cell, but it's all under the cover of self. That's what makes this T cell, so fascinating and so effective. Actually, the only like true effective way to get rid of a virus in the human body. Because what the T cell can do is it can recognize that this body cell is infected, because there are proteins on the cell surface, and that protein can display a little piece of the virus on the cell surface, and the T cell can recognize that and sacrifice self, kill the cell, which is not, something that we want our cells to do, kill our own body cells. So the T cells, you might remember from the endocrine system, we mentioned that the T cells mature in the thymus, and they learn how to work with the other white blood cells to do this function, and also get tested on, the negative selection, like can they recognize body cell. And so that's some hard testing in the thymus that most T cells fail, like we were talking about. So here are my notes on the white blood cells. So the neutrophils are the most numerous, and they can be in the blood, they can leave the blood, go to an area where they're needed, and they're general phagocytes. The eosinophils have the red granules. They usually attack by releasing acidic secretions. They're also phagocytic cells. The basophils are least numerous. They have the blue granules in the cytoplasm, and they're secretory, secreting histamine and heparin. And then the monocytes are the largest, typically circulate for a short time, but then they enter an organ, remain there, and once they're living in that organ, it's called a macrophage, and they're general phagocytes too. So that is a basic story on the different types of white blood cells. As far as white blood cell formation, we looked at hematopoiesis when we talked about red blood cell formation. And I'm just going to jump to a picture from our notes, or the book, my PowerPoint. So the hemocytoblast is a stem cell that gives rise to all other blood cells, as we talked about, including red blood cells and including platelets, which is what I drew in the last video. So the hemocytoblast, very initially, what it does is it differentiates into what's called a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. And you know how we were just talking about how the lymphocytes are very, very different from the other types of white blood cells? And so hopefully this will come as no surprise that the lymphoid stem cell just gives rise to lymphocytes. So B cells, T cells, natural killer cells, all the cells that fall under the realm of specific recognition actually originate in a much different way than all the other white blood cells. So all of the other white blood cells, all of the granulocytes and the monocyte come from the myeloid stem cell line. And when we talked about red blood cell formation, we talked about how erythropoietin played a role in stimulating the myeloid stem cell to take this path. That's basically what erythropoietin does, right? It influences what cell types are going to be produced. So I just want to talk about that for a second. So here's a picture that I took from the internet. So here's the hemocytoblast, and they're showing us it can differentiate into the myeloid or lymphoid stem cell. Lymphoid stem cell just giving rise to the different types of lymphocytes and specific immunity, non-specific immunity, the myeloid stem cells, so, which includes the platelets, red blood cells. So I just thought this was maybe a clearer picture to look at to understand that. And then as far as, what white blood cell is going to be produced, that's determined by, you can see many different chemical messengers, and that goes beyond the scope of this course. But I wanted to talk about that just for a minute anyway. And so some main substances, categories, are interleukins, those are the IL, and colony stimulating factors, the CSF. And those are chemicals that are released by other white blood cells. And so it's a kind of interesting, like I said, like whole world that goes on with white blood cell formation, where when you have white blood cells that are being used, what they do is they secrete the interleukin or the colony stimulating factor to stimulate white blood cell production, a particular type of white blood cell production. And I just wanted to show you that just like erythropoietin, colony stimulating factor is also available. And what this would do is it would boost a person's white blood cell count. So let's say if somebody was taking chemotherapy, you can actually take a drug, colony stimulating factor, to boost white blood cell production. So that's what I'm talking about here. Many pathways produce white blood cells. Production of leukocytes is stimulated by interleukins, which are cytokines. They're just little chemical messengers, and colony stimulating factors, which technically fall into the realm of hormone, even though we didn't talk about those during endocrine system. So the hemocytoblast differentiates into either the myeloid or the lymphoid stem cell. Hopefully that made sense. The lymphoid stem cell is just going to turn into lymphocytes, compared to the myeloid stem cell gives rise to everything else. And then as far as the disorder that we need to know a little bit about is leukemia. And leukemia is uncontrolled growth of non-functional white blood cells. And so just to go to the pictures just for a minute, with leukemia, depending on the type of leukemia, it would be a different cell and a different stage in that cell's life that proliferates out of control. And you would think, maybe this would give rise to like a really great, powerful immune system. But unfortunately, what happens is these cells aren't functional, so it just crowds out all of the other cells. So leukemia is a form of cancer, but because it's blood cells, instead of getting a formed tumor, they're just, overcrowding all of the other cells in the blood. So to jump back to my notes, there are two types of leukemia. Myelogenous leukemia, that would be not a lymphocyte, and then lymphocytic leukemia, where the lymphocyte is involved. Okay, so myelogenous leukemia, you're looking at, something other than the lymphocyte. And then the developmental stage also goes into it. So if it's a blast stage, like an early stage, that's growing out of control, that's what people call acute. Chronic would be the mature cell type is the one that's growing out of control. And you don't need to know the different types of leukemia, but as an example, acute lymphocytic leukemia, that's a common childhood disorder compared to like chronic myelogenous leukemia that's usually found in older people. But hopefully just knowing this terminology, if you ever did hear the term, you know, you can kind of figure out the cell type and also the developmental stage of the cell that's growing out of control. Thanks for watching.